Some people who are living in Idaho recently asked me to go over all the things that have been going on there because, like I live in Kansas, so I'm kind of focused on what's happening here. And then Florida is the other main player, it feels like. But there are anti-trans laws being introduced and passing all over the gosh darn place. And I have a very big story from Idaho. And so I don't know that I'll necessarily end up covering all the many different things that are going on there, but we will at least cover this one that is a pretty major bad thing, especially because the Supreme Court has ruled that this particular anti-trans law gets to stay in place. So this has to do with whether trans youth can get health care. Idaho has been passing other laws that have to do with bathrooms and all kinds of stuff. But so in particular, we're going to be talking about this Supreme Court ruling on this trans healthcare thing, trans youth healthcare. So Idaho passed a ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth, and it's a felony ban. It makes trans care punishable by up to 10 years in prison for doctors who provide it to anyone under the age of 18. This ruling was not based on the merits of gender-affirming care. This addressed broad injunctions and a lower court's ability to block a law fully at the earliest stages, which is a pet issue for some conservative justices who choose to take decisive action when trans lives are at stake. The immediate impact is absolutely clear. Trans individuals will be barred from obtaining gender-affirming care in Idaho, except for only 2 plaintiffs, despite no rationale for how a ban is supposed to work for everyone except those 2 plaintiffs when doctors are broadly barred from providing this care. So in this particular instance, there was a challenge to Idaho's felony ban on gender-affirming care. In December 2023, a federal judge ruled that the ban was likely unconstitutional, ruling in favor of the 2 trans minor plaintiffs, so the 2 trans youth. The judge stated that the right to obtain medically necessary care for your children is, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. Oh, stop using this phrase. Don't use this phrase. This is a meaningless phrase. Like, I hate this because it is not a legal concept. Like, it's one of the things that bothers me so much about this. That's not a legal concept. Oh, this is deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions. How about it's not, like, illegal to do it? And, like, you have the 9th Amendment that says just because you don't explicitly have the right to do something based on this Bill of Rights that we've made doesn't mean that you don't have the right to do it. How about, like, that phrase is one of those things that it's like the courts have just invented something that has nothing to do with any actual practical law, or like it has nothing to, it's that phrase. I don't believe that is in any of our amendments. Like, why are you making a law? Like, you're setting down precedent based on whether things are rooted in this nation's history and traditions. Even in this instance where they're using this rationale to do something that I agree with, I'm still, like, real mad because, like, how is that going to hold up under any actual scrutiny? Like, I just don't understand. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like, or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. But apparently, so Aaron gives this judge credit and says that, like, they're using this phrasing as hopefully a preemptive strike against that language being used to justify bans on trans care if that case should ever reach the Supreme Court. Where did chat go? I clicked away from chat. Oopsie doopsie. There we go. And it's especially stupid because the origin of the phrase deeply rooted in our nation's history, like, it comes from this, it comes from the Dobbs case where they were like, okay, we can't protect the rights to abortion because it's not deeply rooted in this nation's history, which is also frankly just ahistorical. When people wrote about the American Revolution, they wrote about it and described it as an abortion from Britain, and they meant that as a good thing. Like, abortion was considered normal and acceptable and a good thing, and something that was equivocated with the high value concept of freedom. Like, abortion from, like, we are aborting America from the British colonies. Like, that was desirable for them. So it's just also stupid that like even the original instance of saying this is not deeply rooted in this nation's history and traditions, like you're dead wrong. You're wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So apparently the judge issued a preliminary injunction which prevented the state from enforcing the law on anyone while the court process played out. So during the breadth of that injunction, it was the breadth of the injunction that came under dispute in the Supreme Court, not issues directly related to the constitutionality of trans care. Attorneys for the state of Idaho argued that the injunction was too broad and that the state should be allowed to enforce the law on everyone except for the plaintiffs. This is so dumb and annoying. Although it's not uncommon for this to be the way that this goes down. We just covered a partial win in Florida where a judge said you cannot enforce this law about requiring certain pronouns to be used in the school environment. Like you can't force this teacher to go by pronouns that she doesn't want to go by, but it's still working its way through the courts. So they're basically like, well, on our preliminary look at it, we're going to say, no, you cannot enforce this law on this one woman. It's not a statewide injunction. So it is, I guess, within the breadth of normality for them to argue, hey, if you pause this law across the whole state, that's too much. But I personally don't see why you should be allowed to enforce a law if its constitutionality is being debated in the courts. Like, it just seems to me as though you would you would want to avoid accidentally infringing on someone's constitutional rights. You know, like it just seems like one of those things that as a country, given our stated values, you would think that they would want to like err on the side of caution when it comes to potentially infringing on people's constitutional rights. Because that's what the courts are ultimately deciding on. They're deciding on, does this law follow our ultimate law, which is the Constitution? So that's just me. That's just me. That's just my logic is I would say, oi, if this law's constitutionality is being debated, you can't enforce it on anybody. Like, I feel like the standard should be really high on, like, if you're creating new laws that infringe on people's ability to do things, like if you're trying to limit people's ability to do things, there should be like a pretty high bar and it should be pretty rigorous. You know, for example, it makes sense to me that you need to take a class in order to get a hunting license. It also makes sense to me that you need to purchase a certain number of tags for how many deer you plan on killing that year, because we're trying to limit the population of deer but not let things get out of hand. And you have to take the class so that you know what the rules are with regards to hunting. You know, you got to make sure you're not doing things at the wrong time of the year. You got to make sure that if you're required to wear a special color vest, you're wearing that vest. You know, some laws make a lot of sense on like limiting your freedoms. You don't have the freedom to just go out there and kill an unlimited number of deer. Yeah, I know. Sorry, I got a little bit off track there. Clearly, I've been thinking about certain things lately. Okay, so let's see. So basically, the situation that this creates is that if there's anybody else in the state of Idaho who does not want this law to be enforced on them, they would have to go seek an exception from a court and be like, hey, can you please put an injunction on us as well? Like, can you also make it so that we can continue to access care? Attorneys for the plaintiffs pointed out that the broad injunction was necessary because the plaintiffs were using pseudonyms to preserve their anonymity, and therefore without a broad preliminary injunction, doctors would be unlikely to continue offering care, thus making it impossible for the plaintiffs to access that care even with a ruling in their favor. And in doing so, they would have to forfeit their anonymity. Yeah, so these are two children. They're under the age of 18. So in order to, like, you're barring this type of healthcare across the whole state. So what doctor are they supposed to see if you're basically shutting it down across the state? And you're making it a felony, to be clear. They're making it a felony with a 10-year punishment. Let's see. Yeah. Punishable by up to 10 years in prison for doctors who provide it to those under 18. So this is a punishment exclusively for the doctors. So if you're saying to these doctors, hey, we're making this a felony, what are you supposed to, if you're one of the parents of these two trans youth, are you supposed to call and be like, hey, I know that the law says that it's a felony for you to provide this, but it's not a felony for you to provide it to my individual child because of the temporary injunction that was placed on only their case, is that doctor going to believe you? Are you going to have to bring in your court documents? And then your kid is one of the only 2 kids in the entire state who gets to be on this healthcare. Guys, you can tell physically if someone is on puberty blockers or hormones. Like, you can tell. So these children are going to have to sacrifice their anonymity in order to continue getting access to the care. God forbid they are seen in the doctor's office by someone like who knows them and then could out them. Like, there's a reason why the privacy of minors is protected in court cases. Okay, is there anything else in here? So of course it was the conservative majority of the court agreed with reversing the injunction and thereby allowing the law to go in effect for everyone except the plaintiffs in this case. Excuse me. A plurality signed on to Justice Gorsuch's opinion, stating that the ability of judges to issue broad preliminary injunctions should be muted. Oh my God, no, that's the opposite. It should be expanded. You should have injunctions. It should be so easy to have injunctions. If the constitutionality, they apparently didn't have very much to say about the specific constitutionality of the law itself. Although Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett wrote in their separate concurrence that they believe the state may have a likelihood of success on the merits, stating that the merits here, as Kavanaugh described in his opinion, are about the scope of the injunction. So this may not necessarily signal that their votes on the challenges to the gender-affirming care bans. So it's unclear still whether this court is going to take up the issue of like the constitutionality of trans healthcare. I mean, I guess that's a good thing because it's a bad thing in that it leaves it up to the individual jurisdictions. And so, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals may find that you should have trans care, but then the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals may decide that you don't get to have trans care as a youth. So yeah, on the one hand, it would be nice to have the Supreme Court say, yeah, listen, everybody gets to have fucking bodily autonomy. Except that there have apparently been court cases in the past at the Supreme Court level where they have determined that constitutional protections don't necessarily apply to children. So they could just, use that precedent to argue that any argument about children having constitutional rights can just kind of be hand waved away. Mom says there's only one gender and it's my turn on it. True. Up next, elective surgery. God made you perfect the way you are. Except that they're always going to have exceptions for goddamn circumcision and altering intersex babies. The problem is making it easier for judges to do injunctions means it is easier for all of them. It was a judicial injunction that messed with gay marriage after Prop 8 failed. Yeah, I guess I just feel like they're like, I don't know, maybe it's my particular window that I see things happening through, but it looks to me as though there are more frequently questions of constitutionality with regards to these laws that are clearly attacking people's rights, Like, you don't see it as often, I guess, laws that are like laws being questioned. I don't know. That's a really interesting point, though. Like, so someone questioned the constitutionality of gay marriage. And so that was an expansion of rights that was being questioned, basically. Like, is this expansion of rights in line with the Constitution? But I don't think we see that as much lately. Like, this expansion of rights is against the Constitution. Although, to be fair, that is the kind of challenge that we might start to see. You could see it in a progressive state where they've passed some sanctuary protections for trans people. They might be like, oh, well, this is not constitutional. Therefore, this expansion of rights needs to be limited. It's interesting, though. Foreskin is canonically God's mistake. The Bible is a weird book. So yeah, if you're making your nation a Christian nation, you might profess to have the value of not harming children or not altering children or like not wanting anybody to have elective surgery. But then you're going to allow surgery on babies who are too young to receive anesthesia, effectively. Excuse me. So I guess it's good that this particular decision does not immediately impact, anti-trans laws on the merits. This just for now means that like mostly this case is going to impact judges who want to issue preliminary to block statewide laws. They might have to only offer preliminary injunctions to the individual plaintiffs. They might not be able to block it for the whole state. Of course, yeah, Aaron points out that does not really provide much consolation to trans people in Ohio, trans young people who are going to have to go without access to their medication, even though 2 courts have ruled that the law blocking them is likely unconstitutional. There's also going to be questions about broad preliminary injunctions nationwide on trans topics. Like, we likely cannot expect each student to take their school to federal court every time they want to challenge an individual bathroom ban in their local high school, for instance. So, yeah. Anytime a state passes a law that is broadly enjoined at the preliminary stage by lower courts, this issue will arise, and it has surfaced in many other cases as well. Is this antithetical to what the idea of America is all about? I think where we get tripped up here is believing in the professed values, what people say America's about. Like, because we, I think, grew up with this narrative that America is all about freedom and it's all about individual responsibility and it's all about blah, blah, blah. It's a great American melting pot. Did anybody else watch what were those called? Schoolhouse Rock? Great American melting pot. Like, those were all lies, is the problem. If you hadn't been taught this, it's a narrative, it's fake. If you hadn't been taught this narrative that America is, it's a place where your freedom is a priority and your autonomy is a priority and diversity is a priority. It's the problem of listening to what people say over listening to what they do. We all learned when we were little, actions speak louder than words. So, you can say you're sorry, but you should stop hitting your classmate because the action of you being nice is going to say more than your words. You just said sorry. Like, okay, well, you might encourage a little kid to say sorry and give them a hug and then also have changed behavior as part of the apology. Like, you just have to stop assuming that when people do things that are against their professed beliefs, you have to stop assuming that that's just an aberrant mistake and that, like, oh, everybody slips every once in a while. Sure, everybody slips every once in a while, but I think it's been pretty clear that America does not prioritize freedom. It prioritizes power for certain groups, but the whole system is predicated on a lot of people not having the freedom. Like, the fact that you don't have the freedom to move somewhere else means, like, so states are incentivized to make sure that people who live there either don't want to move away or can't move away so that you continue stimulating the economy of the state where you live. So they're incentivized to keep you poor. They're incentivized to tax you a lot because that keeps you poor and it means that they can extract the maximum from you. I live in Kansas and we have shit public services and the cost of living is really low and yet state taxes are incredibly high. Real weird. Like, they're just trying to extract out as much as they can from you. It's a benefit to them that you are not, like, powerful enough economically or otherwise to leave or to respond, like retaliate when they're limiting your rights. Like, how rich is it that I had to pay taxes to the state of Kansas this year when they have made it basically not possible for me to use public restrooms safely? Yeah, Kitty Tick says we need to stop believing that America is what it said that it was, because it is a giant hamster wheel with a meat grinder under it for the people who fall out. It doesn't sound like a functioning country. Yeah, it's crazy how much authoritarian governments they work pretty well. Like, if you think about how long the monarchy has lasted in Britain, and for a huge portion of time, that monarchy was doing active monarchy stuff. Like, there wasn't a parliament, or if there was, the parliament didn't have very much power. At this time, Britain makes itself look like it's more of a democracy because you vote for your members of parliament, but functionally it's still like a monarchy. It's unpopular for the monarch to step in and make pronouncements for parliament, but, like, the fact is that authoritarian governments do have a tendency to last for a while. Oh my god, the yawning. I have not been sleeping well, y'all. It really looks more like a dictatorship. I mean, it's not explicitly a dictatorship, but it is an oligarchy that has been heavily rigged to work in a particular way. There's a bit in BoJack Horseman where one of the characters, like, this guy is like, oh, well, the Supreme Court just made it legal for me to do something really messed up. And the person is in disbelief. They're like, oh my God, what? Like, they can't have made it legal for you to do that. And then they look it up and, like, yeah, it's true. They did pass this law or whatever. And the character's like, oh my God, but you know the president is not going to sign it. And the guy's like, really? And she's like, okay, but the Supreme Court. Okay, I get it. Or yeah, so it's like it passes the Senate, and then she's like, okay, but the House of Representatives. And the guy's like, really? And the character's like, oh, but the president, really? But the Supreme Court? Okay, I get it. And it's just like, it's a funny bit, but it's only funny in that it has this like macabre futility about it that like literally that our country is completely out of our control. You know, that the shtick is like the specific law is that it's now legal for billionaires to just murder people. Like that's the law that has passed. Like wait, you can't. It's not legal for you to murder people. Like, yeah, the law just passed actually. Like, oh, but the checks and balances surely will prevent this from becoming law. But this billionaire is like, really? And yeah, that's how it works. This country is owned by billionaires. What a cheery segment. Thank you, my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, Suzanne Maynard, DZXN, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Ella V. Nobody, Pasnell Infinity, Jamie Jam, Sojo, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Athiet, Kevin Young, Desi Quiche, Celeste, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.